So there's so much to unpack here, and I'll try, even though it's very hard for me, to be brief and to try and also leave some space for a conversation and for questions later. So maybe I'll start with the bottom line. Okay, how did we get to where we are today? Why did we get to where we are today? There's a kind of a famous quote in Hebrew in Israel, "Iganu le'an she'alachnu." We arrived at where we went. What we're seeing now on the ground throughout the West Bank, and I would also add that this also includes East Jerusalem, which is also under Israeli occupation, but it was formerly annexed. What we're seeing now are the results of very, very long-term policies implemented by successive Israeli governments for many, many years that have come to a kind of to an explosion, to this disaster that we're seeing on the ground as a result both of those many years of policies and as well as new developments that have really created a kind of perfect storm in a sense. New changes in Israeli, or relatively new changes in the government. We are dealing with the results of the most far-right fanatical government we've had in our history, and this is crowded the playing field, I should say. The results of the development and the expansion of the very sadly great success of the Israeli settler movement and of the Israeli far right. We're looking at the results of the inaction or the disinterest by the Israeli center or the Israeli, possibly even center left, so the kind of mainstream parts of Israeli society who have simply not focused on anything related to the occupation. We're seeing the results of the lack of any sort of consequences for these policies, the lack of international action. We're seeing the result of these last few years of genocide in Gaza, and we're also seeing the results of the terrible trauma Israel experienced with October the 7th and the massive change in public opinion within Israeli Jewish society post October the 7th, both as a result, as I said, of this trauma and the horrors that people experienced, but also as a result of the very, I think, effective, cynical utilization of this opportunity by the Israeli government, by the Israeli settler movement, in order to promote policies that they have already been pursuing long before the current war, the current genocide in Gaza throughout the West Bank. So it's all of this very, very toxic mix that is really being displayed right now throughout the West Bank. But it's also important to remember that what we're looking at, and I'll try and address why we're talking about ethnic cleansing and why we're using this term as well. What we're seeing right now is the worst it's ever been, and I've been doing this for many years, but I also know people who have been doing this for even longer. And I think no one will tell you that they can ever remember a period where the reality was so awful, and the level of hope and the level of expectation that there could be some sort of resolution was lower, right? And those two things. But it didn't start on October the 7th. It didn't start with Hamas's invasion. It didn't start with the war and the genocide. The trajectory, like we described it, has been for many, many years, in fact, decades, a trajectory of land takeovers by Israel, expansion of Israeli settlements, the the other side of the coin is a reduction and a constant erosion of Palestinian presence on the land, and the use of every possible tool in order to achieve these objectives. So what I'm saying could potentially be seen as kind of contradictory, right? On the one hand, I'm saying, okay, it didn't start with October the 7th. There have been policies, and the Israeli governments, and I say governments, not the government, have been implementing these policies for decades. But then on the other hand, I'm also saying it's the worst it's ever been. And I think the reason, what I'm trying to say, or how I can kind of reconcile these two seemingly contradictory statements is that in our case, I think the quantitative becomes qualitative, right? So I've been tracking Palestinian herding communities that have been displaced by Israeli settler violence for about 3.5 years now. But since the eruption of violence post October the 7th and also the changes in Israeli laws, this government and the different policies it's been implementing, the numbers have shot up. So at some point, even though the policies or the idea is not a new idea, what you're seeing on the ground, the shocking reality of what is happening now on the ground in the West Bank, just becomes like a total quantum leap, or a totally different thing we're talking about. And what I mean is, and maybe I'll explain what you see on the ground right now, and then I'll explain why we think this is ethnic cleansing and why we also want to use the term ethnic cleansing, because we could be using other terms. I think anyone who's been visiting the more remote and rural parts of the West Bank for decades, not just recently, would always be able to see Palestinian herders, Palestinian shepherding communities, sheep and goats walking around, led by herders grazing. It's an image that I think no one who's ever visited probably all of the West Bank, but also certainly the more remote parts of the West Bank has ever missed. It's something that is like part of the land. I mean, David, you described earlier this connection, this description of the connection to the land. I think for me, one of the strongest images that you will ever have, and that I will ever have in my mind whenever I think about the West Bank, is herds of livestock, of sheep and goats grazing on the land. And the grazing was done traditionally for decades, for generations, by small communities of Palestinians who are either Bedouin or just Palestinians from farming backgrounds, who would live in a very in ways that were, again, very, very long term, traditionally quite simple, in tents, shacks, very, very, in some cases even temporary, in other cases more kind of long-term accommodations, and would breed sheep and goats, and then use basically the resources that were around them. Free water that they collected in cisterns, free food because grass would grow, and they would graze the sheep and goats on the grass. And that's how this very long-term community of shepherds existed. And and these herding communities would then have very long-term and established relationships with larger towns and villages, whereby they would sell their products, or they would sell the livestock that they raised. And this is a very long-term part of life in the West Bank. And I don't know how to say it, so I'll say it in the most blatant way. It literally does not exist any longer. You can visit areas east of Ramallah, south of Hebron. You go to most of the Jordan Valley. You go to areas in the northern Jordan Valley, and you will see places where these communities used to reside in. Absolutely empty, destroyed, lying in piles of rubble of different structures. They're empty. If you see a herd of sheep or goats or cows or camels, it will be led by an Israeli settler, a young guy probably who only arrived a couple of years ago. And the very, very long-term tradition of shepherding, of grazing. And it's not just, I don't want to describe it just as some sort of folkloristic tradition. It was also a livelihood for a large community of people. It was a way for people to have to use their skills and their business and their expertise in this way. It was their expertise. As I said, it's gone. Palestinian shepherding communities have been destroyed throughout the West Bank, have been wiped out of the map, removed through brutal violence that was inflicted on them for many, many years, for about 3-4 years, by young Israeli settlers primarily. Some are armed and very aggressive and attack with force. Some attack in a much more kind of like light, I should say, way, but so in some cases it's just young guys who are walking around with a herd of sheep or goats. But the bottom line is that all of these Palestinian herding communities have been forced to escape. We're talking under B'Tselem now monitors the number of entire Palestinian shepherding communities that have been displaced. We have reached 59 entire communities and then a few dozen individual families who are living in these places. 59 communities displaced by this brutal violence. There are some areas, like I said earlier, where in the past you would drive around and you would see the shacks, the very simple lodgings that these people lived in with animal pens, etc., absolutely destroyed. I want to add as an aside that the reason these Palestinian communities couldn't build proper homes was because the Israeli authorities have been implementing a coercive environment to restrict their ability to live and develop according to their needs, and are still to this day demolishing homes of some of the small remaining communities in some of these areas. But overall, the thing that really led these communities to essentially be wiped off the map, is the combination of violence by Israeli settlers, the full support of this by the army or from the army, the total lack of law enforcement. So the Israeli police collaborating essentially with the settlers in this project, and ultimately the probably about 4,500, over 4,000 people, many of them children, have had to escape these areas because life there just became untenable, because life was so scary, dangerous. They couldn't actually pursue their profession, which is, as I said, is breeding livestock. They had to escape. There isn't really a lot of open space in other parts of the West Bank for those people to go to. Everyone I know who is displaced, and I've been kind of following quite a few communities that have been displaced over the last few years, have had their situation deteriorate on every level. And this is their reality. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of this ethnic cleansing that we're seeing now throughout the West Bank is that even in established villages, so not these small herding villages that I think, I'm assuming some of you have kind of seen, but in long-term villages that have been around for hundreds of years, I've been around in these types of structures where people live in built up stone homes, where people have large scale olive groves or other types of agricultural land that they've been cultivating for generations. Those villages in recent years, and this is primarily something that we are seeing since the beginning of this kind of endless war we're in. Those villages have lost almost all of their open land. So the olive groves, the fruit orchards, the some grazing land, almost everything has been lost. People do not have access to it. Because of the same level of violence that is inflicted by Israeli settlers, supported by the state, and it's a hand-in-glove situation, right? It's not just settlers; it's the combined force of settlers in the state. So the land is almost totally lost, and now we are looking at a situation where in some of these villages, even the far out homes, so actual houses where families used to live that are on the outskirts of villages that are a little bit more remote and moved and remote, kind of like a bit outside of the central core of the village. In some cases, families have had to also abandon these homes. And run and seek shelter in places that are a bit more central because of the same amount of brutal, massive violence that we're seeing with total impunity inflicted by settlers, in some cases broad daylight, in some cases in these long late night attacks. So this is the reality that we're seeing. We're seeing Palestinians pushed away from the open land in the West Bank to further and further densely populated enclaves. If in the past there was this conversation or there was this discourse in Israeli society that, and in Israeli right-wing jargon that talked about the struggle for Area C. I don't know if some of you remember this. That was kind of like a buzzword. Now we're not even talking about Area C. We're talking about the struggle for the open spaces in the West Bank. And from the perspective of many Palestinians who live in not in the, as I said, in the far remote small communities, but in villages and small towns, pretty much the only area they can be freely present in is either the built up line, so like actually the houses, the homes of the community, and possibly a little bit further. But they cannot access the vast majority of open land, olive groves, or other agricultural land that they own and that is theirs. This is happening throughout the West Bank. There are some areas, for example, in the kind of like this enclave north of Nablus, which is pretty much almost all Area A. So. And settlements were evacuated from that in 2005. So there was this like momentary, there was this area where there are no settlements or outposts, but the majority of areas throughout the West Bank are constantly being encroached upon by these Israeli settler outposts. And now the settlers are also planning to encroach into that enclave. It's been on the news recently. So that's pretty much what we're talking about in terms of the reality. And these forces that are they're working now on the ground, these forces that stem from some of the most powerful political forces within Israeli society right now, have indicated and have openly said, haven't even whispered this, it's spoken out loud, that they will not rest until they see Palestinians totally pushed away from the open spaces. And many of them have said very clearly they will not rest until they will see all Palestinians pushed outside of our region. I know it's shocking. When I say region, I mean the area between the river and the sea. That's a kind of a fraught term, but in this particular case, I mean it literally. There are some very, very powerful Israeli politicians, Israeli settlers. The best example is our Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, who's also the supreme ruler of the West Bank, because he's also Deputy Minister of Defense, who that's the future he wants to see. Palestinians leaving the region or being forced out of the region if they want to stay, accepting a completely subservient position, totally denied any rights, both individual or collective. That's the plan that he has offered, the future that he perceives. I wish I could say, and this is where I finish, or maybe I'll take 1 or 2 more minutes. I wish I could say that this is just alarmist or that it's irresponsible to discuss this, and in the past I used to be very, very careful about this, but today I think that it would be irresponsible for us to not talk about the real danger that this ideology is posing us, of the desire to remove all Palestinians, to literally to throw out all Palestinians between the river and the sea. And when you mentioned earlier that ethnic cleansing doesn't have clear or like a 100% agreed legal definition, and I agree, but the reason we think this is an important term to use is because it reflects, I think, the gravity of the situation, the shocking nature of the situation, the absolute moral outrage of what we're seeing on the ground. And that's why I think I'm absolutely convinced that this is the correct term morally for us to use, that it's being done in our name, in my name. It's done with our taxes. It's done by our political system, by the military that Israel is serving. And that's why we have an obligation to resist it, to call it out, to do everything we can in order to stop this from happening, and to try also and reverse what has already been done. So a bit of a long answer, but we could probably talk about this for much longer.
I want to share about what we've been witnessing in the Palestinian society recently, which I also got to experience the difference between how we dealt with the occupation before and how it is actually now also affecting us, which is very different. And I think big part of what they made us as Palestinian so strong and firm, and even with less trauma, even though there was occupation, was the connection that we had within the community, within our families, within extremely connected. And every time there was anything happened through the military invasions, or even curfews, or even the first and the second intifada, what we mainly did was immediately come together. Immediately, even families will leave their homes to come and stay in one big home, so they are all together. And one of the main things we've been witnessing is first the increase of the trauma, and also the lack of the possibility of meeting even as one family, due to all of the separation that has been created, even more so during the last 2 years. For example, all of the gates that been put all around, even here around Satyam, it's 3 gates. Like within 3 minutes, there are 3 gates that in 1 second they close. And this separation, we are seeing the way it is actually affecting us, with all of the ethnic cleansing that is also taking place. As Sarit said, we saw just a few months ago, we spoke to you about Ras Al Ain, which is a whole Bedouin community that was fully displaced from around Jericho, which our first community was actually located around Jericho. And now we are fearful of going there. We are fearful of walking in the desert. We are fearful of going around because settlers has taken all over. There is even gates within the desert itself that And the police comes and they check on us if we have the West Bank ID, the Jerusalem ID, and what are we doing there. And this just to show a bit of what is happening. I believe the trauma under the ethnic cleansing is not only, it's not an individual wound. It is carried in the body of people. It's being carried like we've never seen before. It lives in our interrupted sleep. If you look at Pharisee, which we also mentioned a few months ago, and the loss of speech in kids, if you would only go and listen to the mothers and see what is actually being done there due to the settlers attacks, settlers attacking them during the night whilst they are sleeping. And when I say attack, not only attacking around the tents, actually invading the tents, actually throwing fire on the tents, actually coming in and beating up people within the tents. And it is yeah, we've never had to choose between staying rooted and our safety.
Can I just
It
stop you
never
here? I
reached.
have to go to, sorry, May, just a second. I have to go to the shelter. We have an attack, so I'll connect from my phone to Zoom, and hopefully it'll
Yeah.
be within about
Me
10 minutes.
too.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
be safe.
I'm
I'll just
I'm
reconnect
also
here.
going to the shelter.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, everyone.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Yes, be safe here, all of you. So yeah, the shock of the violence that is now taking place and the repetition, the ongoing trauma. It is not an event that happened and ended. We are witnessing an ongoing trauma like we've never also done before. The way it is affecting now, for example, within Satyam and the Combatants for Peace, we are soon launching our solidarity camp with Qusra. And with all of the protection presence that we are wishing to bring, we are also witnessing and being requested to bring even more psychological support due to what is being done there. And it is a sign that the violence that is taking place now in the daily life, ongoing, continuous, is extreme. And at the same time, what I want to say is that one of the reasons I believe in nonviolent resistance is that it does not deny a trauma. We can bring a trauma and talk about the trauma and heal whilst resisting. It's to carry the pain and to say, yes, there is so much pain, and yet we still act. We still resist. We are afraid, and still we show up. We are wounded, and still we want to protect life that is happening. When communities gather, even under threat, to speak, to grieve, to witness, this is healing. This is healing. This is a reminder of what we can do when we come together. Telling stories is also a reminder of who we are, of the land, of staying in a human place that still resists as well. And this is, for example, what we are wanting to bring now in Qusra, taking in consideration all of this and yet standing with the community, resisting the settlers' attacks that are taking place, and showing up, acknowledging what is happening, and yet acting and standing up for what we know is true and what we know is right and what we know is even more powerful than their weapon and than the occupation. And maybe after you heard Sarit, me too, I felt, oh my gosh, can we do anything? And yet, yes, we can. We can. This is why we bring this conversation, so this clarity may be carried to you and from you to many others, spoken about it, so action can be taken. Yeah, thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to come closer to connecting with what this violence and separation and fragmentation is also doing to the resilience of people and the ability to survive, and how that has changed dramatically. And thus the effect, like you said, of trauma and of inability to cope has multiplied in the last years of people. And you keep telling me how many people are leaving, even the West Bank, anyone who can, Christians in Bijala, and just no one is almost left because the life is unbearable. Even if you have a house, even if you live in an area that is less targeted, the effect is everywhere. And I believe that you will also share more later on in the project on Qusra, which Satyam is currently aiming to support and focalize support on. And I want to check for a moment. Sarit, are you back with us?
She said hopefully she's back in 5 minutes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I'm in the shelter now, so just have an alarm. Hopefully, within a few minutes it'll be finished, so I'll be able to get back to sleeping.
So sad.
Yeah, so maybe just take a moment to be with that reality, which is a daily reality currently for so many in the land, which is a constant sirens and bombs, and again here the inequality, presencing the inequality that shelters are not, basically almost not available in the West Bank, and much less available in Arab and Palestinian towns within Israel. So just to also acknowledge that. So I'd like to continue with you, May, until Sarit can come back. From your experience, May, what is most needed now to sustain and amplify the work happening on the ground? Please share what you see. What is most needed to sustain and amplify the work? And maybe even concrete examples, especially speaking to an audience that is not only on the land, but also internationally. What do you see? What is most needed?
Wow. I see so much possible, even though I feel all of the grief. I think what we need to do now is to implement what we know needs to be done, to come together. There are many different ways that one can come in solidarity with what is happening and against the ethnic cleansing. For example, as we just said, David, we are soon holding together the protective presence in Qusra, which is a village around Nablus. It's the village that we have lost one of our community members, Muad Audi, in the beginning of the war on the 11th of October. He was killed by the settlers, and during his funeral, his uncle and his cousin were also killed by the soldiers. And just 10 days ago, we were called again by Mahmoud, Muad's brother, telling us that his cousin Amir was killed by the settlers. Amir's father is still sitting with bullets in his legs. Today, they called me asking if I can in any way support taking him inside in order to get the treatment that is needed and is not available in the West Bank. And we are only talking about one family. All of these people that were killed. One family. Qusra is surrounded by almost 12 other villages. And our aim is to go there and to be in a protective presence to start to be on the ground with the community and to organize together with the community nonviolent resistance, to be there supporting them. We are now organizing the medical support, medical equipment support, first aid trainings, psychological first aid also trainings, our presence there and our media and everything that we know to do in order to help protect against the settlers' attack. What we are witnessing now there is in almost all of the West Bank settlers who are now um, with weapons, which was not before, but now more and more even 14-year-olds come with weapons, with knives, with guns, with M16s, like name it. Some of them even come with the military clothes on, with the bands. They come, they start shooting. They are very well organized, very well prepared, and they are from settlements that are around these villages. They are mainly supported by the military. When the military is called, they don't come to support nor to protect. So one of the things we are doing is being there on the ground. Some of the things you can do is support us, be there on the ground, support us. Be able to bring all of the first aid trainings and also medical equipment that is needed. There is only a few clinics around these villages, and none of these clinics is actually well prepared. The reasons to why Muad passed away and Amir passed away is actually lack of medical equipment and medical care within these villages. So one of the things you could support with either the protective presence, you being physically, if you can, also help us find partners, people that you know can bring us the equipment, donate the equipment, donate money for the trainings of the first aid and the psychological first aid. We are going to train locals and all of these trainings, certified trainings, so they can also continue to be of support to their own communities. So they are not only dependent on us. What we wish to create there is also to empower the community itself. So we're going to train doctors, nurses, mothers, uh, young Palestinians from within those communities. So they have what it takes. So this is also one of the ways you can contribute to also the legal accountability. We want to enforce the international law. We are wishing to report, to use our media, to collaborate with different organizations. We are already in equal partnership with Combatants for Peace and inviting other partnerships to come along. We're going to also train activists on the ground as well so that they will understand how to protect and what to do. So we need resources. If you know of resources, please email us, let us know for the equipment, medical, first aid. As I said, also please follow our media, please share, please reach out to your communities and say, hey, this is happening. This is a way you can support. This is now taking place on the ground. So bring yourselves. If you have cousins who are doctors, if you know organizations, this is also a way. Beside, bringing our voice to wherever you can bring our voice to invite us to even more to your communities to speak and build partnership on what is happening on the ground with where you are now. And this is what I can share. Unless there is a question to that, then please ask.
Thank you. Yeah, let's keep the questions for after. Thank you, May. I think that was clear.
Yes.
So I'm just checking, Sarit, are you back with us?
I think I'll be able, within a couple of minutes, I'll be able to come out of here and be able to rejoin. Sorry for it being in a crowded school room. It is also a shelter.
Yeah, thank you. So until Sarit is back, we can take a moment and see. There's another question that I'd love to ask to Sarit to relate to. Maybe we can see if there's a question in between to May already. Nelson, you were raising your hand?
It's more of a question to Sarit. I'll put it out there, and maybe Sarit can chime in. We're talking about
So let's hear it after when she's back with us.
Okay,
Right?
fair enough.
Yeah,
fair
that
enough.
both of them can hear it. Is there a question that might go directly to May at this point?
I have a question.
I just want to say, I read you, Mark. We'll have a moment to relate to after we hear questions. Yeah, thank you for voicing that. Yes, please.
May, David, sending love. May, when you speak of a different kind of contact, and the suffering, the terrible suffering that's going on now, how does the community be in contact with one another and in support of one another now?
Do you mean the local community or
Yes.
in
Yes.
Qusra?
Yeah.
I mean, the local community is very much in togetherness, and they are very well connected. They are also, our culture is also connected on the dynamic of families and tribes. And so people are very well connected there. There is a lot of support that they are trying to bring to each other, even in the daily lives, for example, with food and so on, like making sure that like all of the families have what they need due to the circumstances of what is happening. There is also organized groups from the local community on the protective presence where they try to inform each other, to go support each other if anything is happening. And this is where we come from. We come to also to empower that and to show them that we are there, we are with them, that we see them, that we name them, that we will protect them as much as we can. It is a solidarity with the community. We are hoping to create different spaces within the community. Also, for example, with the women, and to have different sessions given there with the locals together with us and with the people from the protective presence, to also build the ground of community and to connect them to Satyam and to see how do we support them in different way in the protective presence. But there was an idea of also bringing some of them here, especially the mothers with the kids, to Satyam when it's safer to travel them and to hold things here for them. So there are many different ways and ideas, and yet the community there is really, really standing and really trying their best to hold each other and to come in togetherness with us. So yeah, thank you for the question, Marsha.
Thank you.
I see Sarit is back.
Yes. So I'd love to. Can you already speak to us, Sarit? I'd love to give you.
Yeah, I can. So I'm on the
Beautiful.
phone, but I can speak. But sorry, it's been a bit hard to follow.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us, even though through this alarm. So my question to you is, from your perspective, and this is also because we have many international participants here, right? From your perspective, where is the international community in all of this? What has happened to international law and institutions, complicity of European and US American governments? How do you understand the connection between what's happening on the ground, including the ethnic cleansing and the weakening or breakdown of these systems, or the responsibility of foreign policy?
So, so here's another massive thing to unpack. I also want to maybe address the question about what does it mean to have total lack of law enforcement, and I'll explain why it's connected. Specifically, Israeli violence or violence by Israeli settlers has been a feature of the occupation from the beginning for decades. And it's been accompanied by a great deal of impunity, even at the time, and even forever. But in recent years, since the establishment of this particular government, we're seeing a situation that is unprecedented. We're seeing a formal, official directive by the Israeli Minister of National Security, Minister Ben-Gvir, to the police in the West Bank to not enforce the law on Israeli settlers, to not protect Palestinians from settler attacks. We're seeing a whole, not just a formal directive, but we're seeing how this is playing out in reality. We're seeing the fact that the police, it's obvious that all police officers in the West Bank know that if they do actually do their job in a way and protect Palestinians, they'll not be promoted. They understand exactly the spirit of the commander. And therefore they do anything they can to avoid enforcing the law on Palestinians. And this is from the bottom ranks to the top level. So on every level, Palestinian communities that exist in areas where the only bodies that could protect them are the Israeli military or the Israeli police, etc., because there are no other actors. Of course, I should also maybe say the Palestinian Authority does not have any capacity to operate in these places. And I would also go even further and say that Palestinians also are totally denied any possibility of self-defense, right? No Palestinian can resist in any way this encroachment by Israeli settlers. So the only bodies that somehow remain that in the past people would call or ask for help now are completely alien to them. They deliberately refrain from enforcing the law, which essentially means that the most radical, the most ideological, the most violent settlers can operate and do anything they want with no fear of any ramifications. And so on the one hand, it's incentivized, there's no disincentive against this violence because they know they can get away with it. And then the other point is that it's also incentivized because if you're a young Israeli settler and you manage to remove a massive community from its home and take over their land, you'll then take over the land and you'll enjoy the fruits of that land. So it's a huge benefit. You'll either get a grazing allocation, or you'll be able to open some sort of plantation, or you'll be able to build housing or do anything you want, right? So the reality is that the meager protections that were actually afforded to Palestinians in the past possibly have just totally disappeared. And on top of that, you have many added issues like the fact that the Israeli army now, as we see again and again, both in terms of its top ranking officers and also in terms of its rank and file, the soldiers on the ground, is permeated with Kahanist notions and ideas. So this is as I said, it's a very, very toxic combination. And how is it connected to the international community? Because I think that one of the few guardrails we used to have in the past was the fact that there were some international, I don't want to say sanctions because that's not the word, but some international moves. Actually, there were sanctions against very violent settlers during the Biden administration or the final year of the Biden administration. There were other forms of, I don't want to say protections because it wasn't that great, but certainly it was better than today when there are no protections. And where I would connect this to what the international community is doing is really in terms of I think when we're looking at a situation where internally in Israel, we have a government that is 100% dedicated to the most right-wing, unfortunately, fascist ideology and agenda. We saw it right now, actually minutes ago, with the approval of the Israeli law, a new Israeli law that will allow the courts to impose a death sentence only on Palestinians. It was like you, David, mentioned earlier. It was just approved a few minutes ago by the Israeli parliament. We see it in a whole range of ways. When we have such a spiraling, out of control far right society, and I also have to admit we don't have any power internally as people who are opposed to this to do anything to change it. I think it's even a question of whether the next election that Israel has, if we have it, will be a free and fair election where there is any way to actually remove this government. That's, I think, a very good question. But in any case, under the current situation, with the remaining, I don't know, a few months at least that this government have, this coalition have, they're pretty able to do almost anything they want. And then the only relevant or the possible resistance to this, considering that Palestinians themselves are absolutely unable to resist this, both in terms of certainly as a political or as political beings, because there is no ability now for Palestinians to organize politically in the West Bank, or as just people struggling for their land. And again, I'm not talking about any form of violent or armed resistance. I'm talking about physical presence, non-violent resistance. That even that is not possible for Palestinians. You can get shot simply for demanding that settlers leave your land. And when this is the case, and unfortunately, this is what we have reached now in our situation, the only way to try and change this is through international pressure. I want to say something about the last few days in Israel. I think that there has been an awakening in Israel and in Israeli media and in Israeli discourses in conversations about quote unquote Jewish terror. And I think it's a welcome awakening, although unfortunately it stems from the shocking reality where in broad daylight, settlers have been killing Palestinians with impunity, armed settlers. And footage has emerged of large-scale, massive attacks by Israeli settlers. So there is a certain awakening internally in Israel and by within Israeli kind of media discourses, public opinion, etc. But I think we have to remember that this government will not cave in to this pressure internally. And therefore, external pressure is the only thing that currently potentially has any sort of a chance to change. Excuse me, we've got another alert. To change this, right? So I'll just quickly finish my point and then go back to the shelter. In this particular case, I think, and you can see it actually again over the past few days, after even a few words by the current US administration, Israel has already had to pretend to be taking some sort of action against what they call the Jewish extremists, etc. I would really urge you to not think that this action is actually going to lead to any change, because I think when we're talking about systematic violence and everything that's happening throughout the West Bank, it is systematic. It's a result of like coordinated policies by the Israeli regime. I think the only thing that can make a difference is systematic action towards the regime, and the action that will be implemented vis-a-vis the regime. But in any case, I think the last few days have been a good example of what happens when the international community begins to pay attention. And therefore, as internationals, I would say the most important thing is to always try and use as much pressure as you can with your elected representatives, with people who represent you, even in countries that do not have so much pressure or sway with Israel, because we have to use it. And this is about voting for these issues. It's about organizing for these issues. It's about doing everything you can on a political level to demand change and systemic change. And the one other thing I would like to add is that as Israelis, I constantly, when I speak to other Israelis about this, I think we have to go out to be in the field and in protective presence, because unfortunately, the only thing that we really have right now is the ability to use our privileges as Israelis to stand by communities that are being treated this way. And now I have to run back, so I apologize. I'll hopefully be able to connect in a couple of minutes again.